Alright, the next one is another one of hers that I actually kind of always liked, ever since I saw it when it came out. And it's one of those movies that kind of, just in the casting alone, kind of had you saying, like, yes, this should happen when the news broke that Benicio del Toro would be playing the Wolfman. It's just one of those things that just kind of made sense the second it hit your ears, and it's like, not just because it seemed inevitable after he played the dog-faced boy in Big Top Pee Wee, but still, this sort of immediately became something that a lot of people I knew especially wanted to see. And then I was a little disappointed when it came out, and I saw it the night that it came out, and I liked it a lot. Like, a lot more than I thought I would, too, and I was already kind of hyped for it. But then the reception was a bit, I don't know if cold is the right word, but I know, like, some people maybe found it, like, I heard some complaints that people thought it was boring or too slow and stuff like that. But the thing, like, I think somebody I know might have fallen asleep. But the thing about that is that I mean, I can kind of get it, I guess, because it's like, it's sort of like half horror movie, but also like half period movie, and then there's gonna be like a lot of those moments of like downtime and stuff like that. Or I don't really see it that way even, but I mean, in regards to when people aren't being ripped to pieces is basically what you could call downtime in this movie. Despite the fact that I still feel like they're doing all kinds of different things with it, like the whole time. But the thing about that is that you do obviously definitely need that sort of downtime or the time in between kills, and it might seem like the big scenes, the big werewolf scenes are few and far between, but that's actually really helpful because can you imagine how like you'd almost get like desensitized to the violence probably because and that's I think what makes it so powerful because the kill scenes in this movie are like so incredibly wild and like gruesome and brutal. And it's like to sort of have that in the bursts that we do that are like in between these large stretches of downtime just makes them all the more effective. But like I said, that's if you even want to call that kind of stuff downtime. Like, but I mean, it does start, you know, immediately with this this really sort of clever jump scare moment where it's I know it's kind of hard to come across clever jump scare moments, but the way this is set up in this sense of when we see him out in the middle of the woods and he's stranded and we know what's coming, but obviously there's going to be like the moment there's always the formula seems to be you do the fake out and then you let the audience calm down, and then the person goes a little farther, and then the real threat happens. And this opening does not have the pause. The kill catches you off guard because we do the fake out, and then just as the audience is kind of in that comfort zone that they usually feel where it's the silence before the kill, that's in that period where that usually is when the kill happens. It's right after the fake out, and I always really liked that sort of immediate misdirection in the opening scene. To take something that's usually seen as cheap and to kind of shake it up just a little bit by just making it a little sooner than you're expecting is something I always appreciated. And then, of course, this is when we start meeting our characters, mainly Benicio del Toro, who comes in, and they do kind of an interesting thing here. I don't recall this being part of the character's history prior to this, but my memory's a little vague. But the idea of making him an actor, and the fact that Hugo Weaving brings up later, because the whole thing is this kind of started happening when he started coming around, and it's people are kind of starting to point fingers at him a little bit, and Hugo Weaving comes up with this idea of you're an actor, so you've had all these different personalities in your head and all these different people, fictional or not, inside your head, and it's like, what if one of those is like a killer, and how possible that is. And I really like the sort of stuff that Hugo Weaving has to that also. Obviously he's playing Arlen, who was like it's really interesting to throw him into this, being the fact that he's like a real historical person that actually was, they mention in dialogue as well, one of the like main investigators of Jack the Ripper, and I believe he's been put in like a number of fictional works, most notably when Depp played him in From Hell. So to insert him into this, I thought was just kind of a really cool idea also. And then, of course, once he goes home, we meet his father, Anthony Hopkins, and this this is like gloriously evil Anthony Hopkins, like the best kind. And it's one of those cases where, like, even though it's like technically a twist that he's like the villain, it's like even when we meet him the first time and the subsequent times, there's something a little off about him. And then before he eventually just gets to go full-blown crazy, and it's like, who does full-blown crazy better than Anthony Hopkins, especially when he's playing a fucking werewolf. It just really comes along nicely, and yeah. So, the thing also that I really like about this, that I like about these moments in between the kills, is, and it's obviously a credit to what Joe Johnston did, as well as Shelley Johnson, I believe, as the cinematographer, how you take this werewolf movie, and this kind of goes back to sort of what the classic vibe did, particularly like the 1941 movie and stuff like that, where you take a werewolf movie and you give people what they pretty much think they're expecting in like the opening scene, where it's like he's going to turn into a werewolf, he's going to kill people in the woods, the end. But it's like, especially in these moments in the mansion, it's like they sort of made a haunted house movie too, or at least something with the vibe of a haunted house movie that feels very much like one. Like that whole, like just the atmosphere in general, like with the sort of dooming fog and all the exterior shots, and the interiors, like the production design is like insane, and like these are sets that you could like so easily imagine in black and white, and they would probably look amazing in that sense. And then you've got moments that are like almost ghostly, like when he goes through the door and he's hearing like voices and laughing and stuff like that. And it just turns out to be his memories, but still, there's this sort of just off quality about it, this sort of haunting about it. Which you could say it's haunting anyway, just maybe in general, not necessarily the scary way, but you can certainly take it to that extent before they reveal that, which is nice. And then they sort of add like some things that maybe are a little too horror-y, like before we know about the feral boy and like the fact that he basically started this by biting Hopkins and all that, Del Toro's seeing visions of him, and it's like it just sort of makes it come off more like a generic 2010 horror movie when it came out. But I definitely much more prefer those sort of old-fashioned things. Like another sort of old-fashioned detail, it sort of feels like, is the scene of everybody at the pub, like, sort of speculating on what's going on, and, like, you know, is it a bear, is it a serial killer, what is it, and all that, and just seeing, like, the townspeople in this setting just sort of talk about it, just sort of also has this sort of old-fashioned 1940s horror movie vibe to it. And then I was talking about the production design, I forgot to mention the stuff, like, not just, you know, the regular room scenes in the house, but like the shrine to his mother down there where the cage is, who is just really, it's just really in this atmosphere, and really found that, and it just hits that really right note. And then speaking of the women in his life, there is Blunt's character, Gwen Conliffe, who was also in the original movie, but is significantly more memorable here, because we've, once again, as usual, she's got, like, a lot of different things that she has to do. Because for starters, she was the fiancé of his dead brother, so she's got, like, when it starts, she kind of has that emotional fragility that we see, where it's, like, she really effectively comes off as, like, this person that's traumatized because their fiancé has been graphically mangled to death. But then we get certain aspects of her also where sometimes it's just her mere presence that does the job. Like when she's at his bedside shortly after he's been bitten, or when he's having visions of her in the asylum, and it's like she basically has to be like this sort of dreamlike source of comfort. That especially comes through when you've got, like, obviously sort of the cliche in this scenario is like even the worst of beasts have something that, like, calms them. And she's that for this. She's the one that, like, sees him inside the wolf and is able to, even if it's not in time, manage to somehow bring him out just through that, how he's come to see her, and the way she just conveys that without even, like I said, just that really just relies on her presence alone, and that comes off really nicely. And she's able to mix it up a little bit when she's got, like, that youthful giddiness when they're, like, skipping the rocks and all that, which is a really nice scene. That scene is what you would call, like, the downtime stuff. But it still works just as right, mainly with not just the chemistry between the two of them, but especially the way she brings it, especially after she's just had this magnificent tragedy in her life. It's this, yeah. So, not to mention she's just wearing the holy hell out of those costumes. There's like the green dress, or the way shortly after the funeral when she's like draped across the boulder. Just really makes for memorable imagery also, and just using her voice too, because she's like the beginning and end narrator, and it's like her delivery of that sort of gives it like the authenticity of that mythic feel, as it were. So that just everything she's doing here just really comes together in a nice way, and it could have just been like the throwaway, woman role or whatever, but she really does some good stuff with it. Not to mention, I was going to mention this when we talked about Sam fishing the Yemen, but it's like, she was engaged to Talbot, and she obviously falls in love with another Talbot before the movie's over, and it's like, her name in Sam Fishing in the Yemen is hyphenated, and it's Harriet Wood Talbot, and it's like, I like to think almost that character is like a descendant of this one, and they just went ahead and kept the name for the sake of, how tragic their family was and how connected she was, and it's like making this the most weird-ass cinematic universe you could possibly think of. But jokes aside, going on, there is some issues some people might find, and this one I do kind of get. And that's like, there's quite a bit of CGI going on, and some of it kind of shows. I know there was some disappointment with how much is used for the wolf himself, despite the fact that Rick Baker worked on this, and he like sort of was the one that like really brought to life the werewolf transformation with American Werewolf in London in a way that you just can't match. Even back then in 1981 or whatever. And they have him doing it. And he, regardless of all the CGI that's in it, he still won an Oscar again for makeup. But still, there is a lot of CGI, especially in the transformation. It does sort of make you miss the, just how grossly realistic it felt in stuff like American Werewolf in London. And then there's stuff that's just sort of completely unforgivable, like just how fake that CGI bear looks. But I mean, you look at that stuff and still there is something here, especially in regards to like the brutality of it, like the claws, and just how these claws feel so ruthless, and it is like watching a bear attack when he's like killing somebody, regardless of how over the top it is. Because sometimes they do have a sense of humor about the kills in this. Like one of my personal favorites is the dude that's chased into like the pond, and decides that he's not going to die this way, so he's just going to shoot himself, and when the gun doesn't go off, he just gets his fucking head ripped off, and it's like there's definitely some sort of sense of humor at play there, or the dude towards the beginning that just gets completely wiped off the screen unexpectedly. It's nice to see that they like really go all out with the gore and the brutality, but they also kind of had that sort of twisted sense of humor about it in some cases too, which is a nice balance to that, just how far it goes and how graphic it is. But that's the thing too, is it's these scenes where he is the werewolf, especially how some of them are particularly long, like when he's being chased in the middle, where these scenes are like just as thrilling as they are horrific too. Like it could seem they're like maybe wallowing in the gore, but I don't think so at all. I think it's really just, yeah, some of it is like really, really gory, but still, that's sort of, I think that's kind of what people wanted going in for a movie like this, because we've had so many sort of watered down things like Hugh Jackman's Van Helsing and bullshit like that. So to see it just really go for that was kind of really nice to see. And the like I said, and just the way it's like the scene where they have him strapped down and they're like, we're going to show you when the moon is full and you don't change, that means you're crazy or whatever. But it's like, because we know what's coming, and we know what to expect, not just what's going to happen, but like how brutal it's probably going to get. It's like we're both excited and wincing at the same time at the thought of what's about to happen. And that's a really exciting feeling in a movie like this. And of course, this eventually gets us to our climax. I really love the climax of this, the fight between him and Hopkins. I love that Hopkins's wolf is like kind enough to rip his shirt off so we can tell the difference between the two. Even though his fur is grayer, we probably still could have been able to tell, but it's nice that he went the extra mile for us. So yeah, and the way it just combines all these things, where it's got the horror and the gore. It's got just on the production values alone are just incredible. The casting is perfect. Just all this stuff comes together, and it's and yeah, it's exciting. Like a lot of these scenes, they almost feel like action scenes, really, as opposed to horror scenes as well. But it all, to me, it all just comes together quite nicely, and I like it. I've seen it a number of times, and I like it just as much as I did the first time I saw it still. So it's always held up quite nicely for me. So yeah, so that's what this is, and she explored horror one more time, and we'll get to that. It's actually going to be a versus segment, so that's probably a few down the road, but so we'll have that when we get there. So until then, that's it.